Hi everyone, welcome to the vision. You'll be rocking her world in no time. My name is Ms. Tech and I'll be your raid guide. Ms. Tech, find yourself stoned, you'll be rocking her world in no time. My name is Ms. Tech and I'll be your raid guide. Melusine is a relatively simple fight that builds on its mechanics with each phase. However, even after learning the entirety of fight mechanics, it may take your group some time to work out all the wiggles. The bulk of the fight comes from a combination of 3 master mechanics that will occur throughout the entire fight: Cursed Voice, Cursed Shriek, and our newfound friends, the Renauds. Let's go over what these are before we put together the big picture. Cursed Voice is cast by Melusine and will always hit 3 people: one of the tanks, any one of the damage dealers, and one of the healers. This cast will place a 5 to 9 second debuff on those players, denoted by this triangle debuff. After the duration of the debuff, anyone marked with Cursed Voice will shoot out a fairly long frontal cone that will petrify anyone and anything caught in the blast. Anyone hit by Cursed Voice is highly vulnerable to death, as any damage to them, no matter how small, automatically becomes a one-hit kill. That said, it's absolutely crucial that players do not petrify any other players, ever. Furthermore, hitting any ad or Melusine with Cursed Voice will place a stacking damage buff on them that will last the duration of the fight. Don't make your life any harder and avoid this as well. Master mechanic number 2 is Cursed Shriek. This is another cast that will place yet another debuff on another player, denoted this time by the circle debuff. Any affected player will blast a room-wide petrification that will hit anyone and everything on the platform, resulting in instant death, unless they find somewhere to hide. So how do we handle this? The platform has no pillars or anything to hide behind. This leads us into master mechanic number 3, the Renauds. Melusine will periodically spawn a massive Cyclops somewhere on the platform. They do not follow a conventional threat table and will instead fixate on the first person to damage it. The Renaud will one-hit kill its target once it's in melee range. As such, anyone assigned to deal with Renauds needs to be proficient at kiting. Luckily, they spawn with a native heavy on them, making them fairly easy to outrun. Note that other slowing debuffs or binds can stack with this if you so feel the need. In our group, we use a bard to kite the Renaud, as they can still effectively deal damage while running around like maniacs. However, any ranged damage dealer can easily do this, so decide what's best for your group. This ad is the only thing you want to purposely hit with Cursed Voice. For the most part,
Linus Tech Tips coverage of CES 2015 is brought to you by Phantom Glass. Visit store.phantom.glass for the best darn screen protectors out there, as well as HyperX.
Kicking things off in the Cooler Master Suite, we've got, well, cooling technology. How very unexpected. This is something that they're calling 3D vapor chambers. Now, it's not the first time that we've seen Cooler Master throw vapor chambers onto a CPU cooler. Vapor chambers, actually, you can learn more about them here. We've done an entire episode of our Fast as Possible segment on them, but basically they are usually flat. Now, 3D vapor chambers are not flat. In fact, they are three-dimensional. And what they've done is they've tacked on what appear to be normal heat pipes, but but instead of just having heat pipes soldered to the top of a vapor chamber that then makes contact with the CPU for optimal heat spreading, here they have actually integrated the heat pipe structure into the vapor chamber. So unfortunately, we don't have any live demos running yet, but we do have a very early prototype of one that has both the traditional heat pipes on top of a vapor chamber design as well as 3D vapor chambers running up through the heatsink fins, and we can be expecting to see a little bit more about this technology around the Computex timeframe. But the really revolutionary technology, in that it spins, see, haha, it's a joke about cooling, is right here. And this is from a partner of Cooler Masters called CoolChip. These guys are showing off a completely different way of cooling CPUs. Now, at first glance, this might not really look like anything special, okay? It's got a flat surface on the bottom. That's what you stick on top of the CPU, GPU, or your forehead, or whatever else it is that you need to keep cool. And then it's got some fins on the top that are, well spaced for dissipating heat. And then normally you would throw a fan that's usually about the same thickness as the heatsink itself to go ahead and blow air down on that bad boy and remove it from the metal. But no, this works completely differently. What it actually does is it spins the top. There we go. Let's just take this thing apart. It spins the top of two plates around, and that is what generates the airflow that cools metal. So we don't actually need a fan anymore at all. And you're kind of probably looking at me going, well, hold on a second, Linus, how the heck does that work? I mean, if these two plates aren't connected to each other, then how are you even going to transfer the heat to it? That sounds completely inefficient. Well, actually, hold on a second, no, because with precise enough manufacturing, they can actually make these interlocking grooves between these plates be so close to each other that even as they're spinning around, heat transfer is basically unimpeded. Now, this isn't the first time that I've heard of this technology, although I have to admit, with my skepticism hat on, I wasn't convinced necessarily that it was ever going to make it to a cost-effective sort of retail-type product, because the Sandia Cooler YouTube video that has over 500,000 views has been out there for a couple years now, but this is the first time I've seen it actually working, and they do have it actually working. So that one doesn't work. That one you can take apart just
Now in this tutorial we will try to create a class that will help us call the static methods from this class, which is working with static methods. So let's try to create this class, and we're gonna call this one using static methods of another class. It's a long name that defines the purpose of the class. And let me set up my class. This tutorial will in fact be a very brief tutorial, because all we are doing is we are calling the methods of static methods of another class. Since both classes are part of the same package, I don't necessarily need an import statement. All I need to know is the name of the other class. And as I am calling, I put a period here, and it gives me a little drop down box to choose from. So from this drop down box I choose my print method. And that is the first method. Then I call upon this class and I decide to choose the zip code. Now notice zip code actually returns an integer back to me, and it tells me right over here in this drop down box that the method name is zip code. It returns an integer as opposed to print message that returns a void, and it belongs to this class. So now what I must make sure is that when zip code accepts a value from the user, because that's what it does, I must be able to catch that value in some kind of a variable of type int, so that I can then display that value back to the user. So in this program, the only thing different that I'm going to do is I will try to display the value on the console, and I will also try to display the value in J option pane, so that you can see how it works in both environments. So I will just use null and a little message down here that says zip code is, just to be a little different from the first message. And let's pop up dialog box to accept input from the user, and as I enter a zip code and hit OK, you will notice that the zip code gets displayed down here and also up here in a message, and Java World
Bye.